This is one of my favorite movies of all time. Interstellar is a masterclass in cinematography. Every frame is deliberate, calculated, and deeply emotional. Today we're going to break down the visual DNA and the reasoning behind some of these shots from the movie. This is Shoot Like a Cinematographer, Interstellar Edition.
I need to fix this before I go. I've got kids, Professor.
I'm asking you to trust me.
Here we go.
The first thing that we're going to break down and talk about is lighting. One of the things that makes Interstellar so special is how grounded the lighting feels. Not just on Earth, but also in space and in these spacecrafts as well. A decision that I loved that the DP and Christopher Nolan made on this project was the fact that they leaned very heavily into practical lighting. In fact, a lot of these scenes almost feel more like a documentary with how grounded and realistic they are. Even the space travel and all of the different elements of them being in the spaceship and going through the black wormhole, it all feels very real and believable. Nothing feels like it's too perfect or it feels too pretty. It all feels like you are right there in the moment with them. And I think that this realness that they gave to Interstellar had such an effect on how it makes the viewer feel. And when you think sci-fi, a lot of the times I think epic lens flares and super futuristic looking images, but in Interstellar it almost like makes you feel like it takes you back to the past with everything shot on Earth. And even in the spacecraft, it feels something that's very realistic. It doesn't feel like the future at all. And I believe visually that's what makes viewers buy into this, because it doesn't feel so far-fetched. You almost feel closer to it and you almost feel the realism, and everything's heightened because of that decision that they made. Now, if we go back and we take a look at a lot of these interior shots on Earth, most of the lighting is all coming from these windows, again, making it feel very realistic. And instead of adding a ton of lights, we're having really obvious backlighting or hair lighting that you would see in a lot of movies or TV shows. They really just shaped the natural light that was coming in from these windows. And yeah, they might have punched a bunch of light through these windows, but they were really just shaping it on the other side, probably by putting a lot of duvetine or negative fill on this side of the camera. Visually, the story that they were trying to tell and what they were trying to do was really just make you feel like you were in somebody's house, that you could walk in there and it felt lived in, it felt real. It didn't feel like it was too perfect. All of the lighting was too beautiful and too nice. It was very grounded and very realistic. Now, a very ambitious undertaking in a lot of these dust storm scenes was the fact that they actually blew dust and debris in these scenes to be able to create that authenticity of the imagery that they captured.
Oh, a dust storm. You figured you were going to just look at an empty landscape and that they'd put it in later for us so we would have to pretend. No.
Chris wants to always do as much as you can practical. I mean, if you can achieve it in camera, that's always the goal.
Now, of course, you could have done this with VFX, or you could have really enhanced it with VFX, but a lot of this was shot practically. And to me, I respect the hell out of that so much, because the way that this dust interacts with light is going to heavily affect the way this looks on screen and on camera. And when you put your actors and you actually shoot that scene with all of that dust, and I mean like they had to flood the entire town with dust. It was insane. But the fact that they did that adds to the overall realism to these scenes. Most of the interior scenes were lit by actual onboard fixtures, LED panels rigged to simulate soft window light or some sort of ambient glow. If you notice on Anne Hathaway's reflector dish, you can kind of see the tube light right here and like a little LED fixture, but for the most part, all of this is all lit by the interior lighting that they added to the spacecraft. A staple in this film is the camera movement and or lack of camera movement. As you're watching Interstellar, if you notice, if you really pay attention, most of the shots are locked off on a tripod. And when you are locked off on a tripod, it gives a completely different feeling than if something is on a dolly or handheld. It feels like a deliberate, patient stillness. And what that does is it gives the audience room to breathe. It allows ideas to settle. But when the camera does move, it's very intentional. This right here is one of the most emotional scenes I have ever seen in a film. And if you notice, the scene starts off locked off on Cooper. But as the scene intensifies and Cooper's emotions heighten, the camera starts to slowly push in. And as the camera's pushing in, it's bringing you closer to Cooper, making you really feel his emotion, and it's really intensifying what you're seeing on screen. And just that simple little push in said so much. But during a lot of these conversations throughout the film, they're locked off. And the reason why they're locked off is because they don't want you, as the audience, to have any other distraction. They want you locked in to the dialogue and what the character is saying, because the dialogue is so important and they don't want you to miss that or get distracted by that. Now, if you take the docking scene, for example, it erupts into this sort of kinetic tension. They definitely shot this handheld with these, quick pans and handheld shaking frames, which gives it this controlled disorientation. Now, if these shots were locked off, it wouldn't have given the same feeling. You needed to feel the intensity. So very deliberately, they had it be handheld, and they really brought you into the moment and the chaos of the scene. And another staple of the cinematography are these mounted camera rig shots. The first time you see this is on the car while Cooper is driving into the cornfield. And then you see it again when he's driving away from the house. Then you get these really awesome shots of the spacecraft as it's entering into space or as it's going onto a new planet. And these hard mounted shots are not only just visually interesting, but they bring the viewer, instead of just as an observer of the motion, it has you become part of that motion. And what's amazing is how intentional those camera shots are. They want you to feel the intensity of that spaceship entering that new environment, and I think it does a great job at that. Another very important factor to the visual playbook of Interstellar is the composition and the visual language that they use. There is so much to be said just by placing your character or characters in a certain part of the frame. A lot of the times, characters are center framed, surrounded by a ton of negative space. A lot like having still locked off shots, what this does is give you a clean, symmetrical frame, so that way it emphasizes the isolation. And the more negative space they add in these frames, the more fragile and small they make these characters feel in their surroundings. Now, something that we haven't gone over yet that is extremely important is the fact that this film was not shot on digital. 70% of it was shot on IMAX, 65mm film. And this makes a big difference because these large format cameras create unmatched depth and immersive scale. Now, from a technical standpoint, what that allows you to do is that even with a wide angle IMAX lens, you can get close to an actor's face while still capturing these vast landscapes behind them. And what's interesting about that is that it sort of does this paradox of giving you this intimacy with the character, but still allowing you to feel the entire frame. Now, another thing that was very important was not just the camera and shooting it on film, but also the lens choice. On Earth, they used a 35mm Panavision anamorphic lens, which is extremely intentional because it's slightly more textured and nostalgic feeling than the lens they decided to use in the spacecraft. For the space scenes, they were looking for a much more clinical looking feel, and that's where they turned to the Hasselblad IMAX lenses. These lenses are in the opposite direction of the ones that they chose on Earth. Instead of having a lot of character, they are very clinical, and they're known for their extreme sharpness, low distortion, and a naturalistic rendering of the detail and contrast. Now, of course, when you are shooting on IMAX, the big IMAX 65mm camera, it's loud, it's heavy, and when you are in cramped, tight spaces, which a lot of the film takes place in this spacecraft, it's not really practical for you to do that. So when they were shooting on the spacecraft, they used a Panavision film camera, which gave them the ability to shoot close-ups on the actors in those cramped spaces while still capturing expansive views of the interior. If you guys are interested in seeing more of this, drop some comments down below and let me know what movie you guys would like to see next. Like I said, my name's Alex Zarfati, and I'll see you guys next week. Deuces.